The old Vraxian admiral stared at the holographic display showing Earth's blue marbles spinning peacefully in space. His four eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit he'd developed over his 3 centuries of service. The data streams flowing across his command console told a story that made his chitinous skin crawl with unease. "Admiral Kethvar," his aide whispered, approaching with careful steps. "The final reconnaissance reports from the Sol system have arrived." Kethvar's mandibles clicked together softly. He had been dreading this moment for months. The Galactic Confederation had been watching humanity for decades now, ever since their first crewed spacecraft had begun venturing beyond their home planet. What they had discovered was both fascinating and deeply troubling. "Display the summary," Kethvar commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through countless battles across the galaxy. The hologram shifted, showing a compilation of human military activities. Weapons testing, training exercises, strategic deployments. But it wasn't the scale that worried the admiral, it was the intensity, the relentless innovation, the sheer creativity humans applied to the art of destruction. The aide, a young Zelthian with pale green skin, trembled slightly. "Sir, our xenobiologists estimate that humans spend approximately 30% of their planetary resources on military development and warfare. This is unprecedented among civilized species." Kethvar's eyes narrowed. In his long career, he had encountered over 40 different sentient species. Most had evolved past their violent tendencies within a few millennia of achieving spaceflight. The Vraxians themselves had been warriors once, but, even at their most aggressive, they had never matched what he was seeing from humanity. "Show me the historical analysis," he ordered. The display changed again, revealing a timeline of human conflicts. War after war, stretching back thousands of years. The aide began reading from the report, his voice growing shakier with each statistic. "In the past century alone, they have engaged in 2 planetary conflicts involving multiple continents. Conservative estimates suggest over 100 million casualties combined. But, sir, what's most disturbing is that these wars accelerated their technological development exponentially." The admiral studied the data showing human technological progress. Before their great wars, they had been using horse-drawn carriages and primitive firearms. Within decades of their conflicts ending, they had developed nuclear weapons, jet aircraft, and early computers. The pattern was unmistakable: humanity thrived under the pressure of warfare. "Their weapons technology," Kethvar mused aloud, "how does it compare to our own?" The aide hesitated. "Sir, while they lack our understanding of energy manipulation and faster-than-light travel, their kinetic and explosive weapons are remarkably sophisticated. Our analysts believe that given their rate of innovation during conflicts, they could pose a significant threat within decades of first contact." This was exactly what Kethvar had feared. The Galactic Confederation had strict protocols for integrating new species. Most civilizations were welcomed after a careful evaluation period, gradually introduced to galactic society through trade and cultural exchange. But humanity presented a unique challenge. "Have you reviewed their entertainment and cultural products?" Kethvar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir. Their fiction is filled with scenarios involving galactic conquest, alien invasions, and interstellar warfare. They seem to instinctively understand concepts of space combat that took other species centuries to develop. More concerning, they appear to find these scenarios enjoyable." The admiral's 4 eyes closed in contemplation. Other species had developed space opera fiction, but it was usually focused on exploration, diplomacy, or scientific discovery. Humans seemed uniquely fascinated with the violent aspects of galactic civilization. "What does the Council recommend?" Kethvar asked, though part of him didn't want to hear the answer. The aide activated another display showing the formal recommendation from the Galactic Council. The text appeared in the flowing script of High Galactic, but Kethvar could read the intent in the formatting alone. This was a security classification he had hoped never to see applied to a developing species. "The Council has designated humanity as a Class 7 emerging threat. They recommend immediate intervention before humans develop faster-than-light capability." Kethvar felt his stomach drop. Class 7 was reserved for species that posed an existential threat to galactic civilization. In the Confederation's 12,000-year history, only 3 species had ever received this classification. 2 had been successfully contained. The third had required a coalition of 40 species and a century of warfare to defeat. Intervention options, he asked, though he was beginning to understand why he had been chosen for this assignment. 3 primary scenarios, sir. First, covert technological suppression, sabotage their space program, and scientific development to delay their advancement by several centuries. Second, limited first contact with careful control of technology transfer. Third. The aide paused, clearly uncomfortable with the final option. Say it, Kethvar commanded. Preemptive military action. Disable their industrial capacity and establish a protectorate government. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kethvar had participated in protectorate operations before. They were brutal affairs that typically resulted in the near-total subjugation of the target species. The Confederation generally reserved such measures for species that had already proven themselves hostile to galactic peace. Show me their space program status, the Admiral said, buying time to think. The display shifted to show human space activities. Primitive by galactic standards, but advancing rapidly. They had established a permanent presence in orbit around their planet and were making serious attempts to reach their planetary neighbors. More concerning were the military applications, weapons platforms and surveillance satellites were proliferating. Our projections suggest they will achieve faster-than-light travel within 50 to 75 years, the aide reported. Once they do, containment becomes exponentially more difficult. Kethvar studied the human spacecraft designs. Even their peaceful exploration vessels were built with robust defensive capabilities. Their space stations looked more like military fortifications than research facilities. Everything about human space development suggested a species preparing for conflict. What about diplomatic contact? He asked. Surely the Council considered peaceful integration? The aide activated another file, this one containing psychological profiles of human leadership. Our behavioral analysts have concerns, sir. Humans appear to view any superior force as either a threat to be eliminated or a challenge to be overcome. They have no concept of voluntary submission to a greater power. Every model suggests that first contact would eventually lead to conflict. This was the heart of the problem. Most species, when confronted with the vast scale and power of the Galactic Confederation, recognized the futility of resistance and sought accommodation. Humans seemed constitutionally incapable of such pragmatism. Their reaction to perceived weakness? Kethvar asked, testing a theory. Exploitation, sir. Human history is filled with examples of smaller groups challenging larger ones when they perceived advantage or opportunity. They seem to instinctively probe for weaknesses in any power structure. The Admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly now, a sign of deep distress. The more he learned about humanity, the more convinced he became that peaceful coexistence was impossible. They were simply too aggressive, too innovative, too unpredictable to safely integrate into galactic civilization. Admiral, the aide said quietly, there is one more factor the Council asked me to emphasize. Speak. Humans are remarkably adaptable. Our biologists note that they have successfully colonized nearly every environment on their planet, from Arctic wastelands to underground cave systems. They show an unusual capacity for survival under extreme conditions. This was perhaps the most troubling factor of all. Other species had evolved in specific environmental niches and remained largely bound by those limitations. Humans seemed capable of adapting to almost any circumstance, which made them nearly impossible to contain through environmental manipulation. Kethvar turned away from the display and walked to the massive observation deck that dominated one wall of his command center. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see the Confederation fleet assembled for this mission, over 300 ships representing dozens of species, the largest military force assembled in living memory. Sir, the aide prompted gently. How many human military personnel are estimated to be active? Kethvar asked without turning around. approximately 100 million in various stages of training and deployment across their planet. The number was staggering. Most civilized worlds maintained military forces numbering in the thousands, primarily for ceremonial purposes and disaster response. Humans had militarized their entire species. And their industrial capacity for weapons production? Effectively unlimited, sir. They have developed what they call total war doctrine, the ability to convert their entire economic base to military production within months. Kethvar closed his eyes again. The Confederation had never encountered a species with such militaristic tendencies combined with advanced industrial capabilities. Even their most aggressive member species had never approached this level of martial organization. Admiral, the Council is awaiting your final recommendation, the aide said softly. Kethvar knew that his next words would determine the fate of an entire species. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. He had spent his career protecting galactic civilization from various threats, but he had never faced a decision of this magnitude. In your personal assessment, he said to his aide, is there any scenario in which humans can be safely integrated into the Confederation? The young Zelfian was quiet for a long moment. Sir, I have reviewed every historical precedent, consulted with our best xenopsychologists, and run countless simulation models. Every analysis reaches the same conclusion: humans will eventually challenge Confederation authority. The only variables are the timeline and the scale of conflict. And, if we attempt to contain them on their home planet, they will dedicate their entire civilization to breaking free. Our models suggest they would achieve faster than light travel decades ahead of our current projections, driven by the pressure of imposed limitations. Kethvar turned back to face the display showing Earth. Such a beautiful planet, teeming with life and potential. It seemed almost impossible that such a peaceful-looking world could harbor the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. Admiral, the aide continued, there is one final consideration the Council wanted emphasized. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected several other species at similar developmental stages to humanity. If we allow humans to achieve galactic expansion, they may encounter and potentially weaponize these other emerging civilizations. This was the nightmare scenario that kept the Confederation leadership awake at night. A human-led coalition of militaristic species could potentially challenge the established order that had brought 12 millennia of galactic peace. Prepare the fleet for action, Kethvar said quietly. Sir? Which option have you selected? The Admiral looked once more at the peaceful blue world spinning in the hologram. Option 3. Full military intervention. But, we're not establishing a protectorate. The aide's green skin paled further. Sir? We're going to give them what they seem to want most, Kethvar said, his voice heavy with resignation and determination. We're going to give them a war. But, this time, they're going to lose. The decision was made. In moments, Kethvar would transmit the order that would begin the largest military operation in Confederation history. The fleet would move toward Earth, not as explorers or diplomats, but as conquerors. But, as the Admiral prepared to seal humanity's fate, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. Something about the humans suggested that even in defeat, they would find a way to make the galaxy regret this decision. The moment Admiral Kethvar chose war against humanity, he set in motion events that would forever change the galaxy. He just didn't realize it yet. Dr. Sarachin stared at the impossible readings on her monitoring station deep within the Cheyenne Mountain complex. The massive underground facility hummed with activity as dozens of technicians scrambled to make sense of what their instruments were telling them. Ma'am, called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from across the command center, NORAD confirms the objects are definitely artificial. Whatever they are, they're not ours. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the sensor parameters for the 100th time in the past hour. The readings remained consistent. Over 300 massive objects had appeared at the edge of the solar system, moving in perfect formation toward Earth. Each object registered as roughly the size of a city block, and they were accelerating at speeds that defied every law of physics she understood. How long until they reach Earth? Asked General Morrison, the facility's commanding officer. His weathered face showed the strain of the past few hours since the objects had first appeared. At current acceleration, approximately 72 hours, sir, Sarah replied. But, General, these readings, whatever's powering those ships makes our nuclear reactors look like campfires. The general nodded grimly. 3 hours earlier, he had been dealing with routine military exercises. Now he was potentially facing humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and everything about the situation suggested it wasn't going to be friendly. Any response to our transmission attempts? Morrison asked the communications team. Nothing, sir. We've broadcast on every frequency we can generate, in every mathematical language our scientists could devise. They're either not receiving us, not interested in talking, or... The technician's voice trailed off. Or they're here to fight, Morrison finished. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what are we looking at? Sarah pulled up her analysis on the main screen. Years of studying theoretical xenobiology and serving as the facility's chief scientist had prepared her for this moment, though she had always hoped it would come under different circumstances. Sir, based on the formation patterns and approach vectors, this appears to be a military operation. The objects are maintaining perfect spacing for mutual defense, they're approaching from multiple angles to prevent us from focusing our defenses, and their energy signatures suggest weapon systems far beyond our current capabilities. The command center fell silent except for the constant hum of electronics and the quiet conversations of technicians still trying to gather more data. Morrison studied the display showing the approaching fleet, his mind racing through options that all seemed inadequate. Recommendations, Doctor? Sarah hesitated. Everything in her training told her to advocate for peaceful contact, to assume good intentions until proven otherwise. But, the evidence was mounting that humanity was about to face its first interstellar war. Sir, I recommend we activate the Emergency Defense Protocol and notify all Allied military forces worldwide. If these are hostile forces, we need every available asset prepared for combat. Morrison nodded and reached for his secure communication device. Within minutes, military forces across the globe would be receiving orders to prepare for an enemy unlike anything they had ever imagined. As alerts began flashing across monitoring stations worldwide, a different kind of preparation was taking place in a small research facility outside Geneva. Dr. James Wright, head of the International Space Defense Initiative, was reviewing files that most of the world's population didn't know existed. For the past 20 years, a secret international consortium had been developing weapons and defense systems based on a simple premise: if humanity ever encountered hostile aliens, they would need every advantage they could get. What had started as a fringe research project had quietly grown into a massive undertaking involving the world's brightest minds and most advanced technologies. James called his assistant, Dr. Priya Patel, from across the laboratory. The orbital defense platforms are coming online. All 12 stations are operational and tracking the incoming fleet. Wright looked up from his computer screen where he had been reviewing weapon specifications. The orbital platforms had been his pet project for over a decade, massive railgun installations disguised as commercial satellites, capable of accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. What's their estimated range and effectiveness against targets of this size? He asked. Against conventional spacecraft, each platform could disable or destroy a target with a single shot. But, James, these ships are showing energy shields of some kind. Our projectiles might not penetrate their defenses. This was the problem Wright had spent years trying to solve. How do you fight an enemy with technology centuries or millennia ahead of your own? His answer had been simple: you don't try to match their sophistication. You hit them with so much raw force that their technology can't compensate. Activate the Prometheus array, Wright ordered. Patel's eyes widened. The Prometheus array was their most ambitious project, a network of lunar-based mass drivers capable of launching asteroid-sized projectiles at incredible velocities. It was humanity's ultimate weapon, designed to crack planets if necessary. James, are you sure? Once we activate Prometheus, there's no hiding our capabilities. If these visitors have peaceful intentions, look at the formation patterns, Priya. Look at their approach vectors. These aren't explorers or diplomats. These are warships, and they're coming to subjugate or exterminate us. As Wright's team began the activation sequence for humanity's hidden arsenal, similar preparations were taking place in military facilities across the globe. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, experimental submarine platforms equipped with nuclear-powered plasma cannons were rising from their hidden bases. In the mountains of Tibet, ancient-looking monasteries were opening to reveal missile installations that could launch payloads anywhere in the solar system. Humanity had been preparing for this day longer than most people realized. Back at Cheyenne Mountain, Dr. Chen was coordinating with research stations worldwide, trying to gather as much intelligence as possible about the approaching fleet. What she was discovering both fascinated and terrified her. "General Morrison," she called out, "we're getting more detailed scans as they approach. These ships, they're not just advanced. They're each the size of a small city, and they appear to be heavily armed and shielded." Morrison joined her at the monitoring station. "How heavily armed?" "Sir, each ship is carrying enough firepower to level a continent. If they're hostile, they could render Earth uninhabitable within hours of arrival." The general's jaw tightened. "Then, we'd better make sure they don't get that chance. Order all our hidden assets to prepare for coordinated strike operations. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they won't forget." Unknown to either Chen or Morrison, their conversation was being monitored by intelligence networks that spanned the globe. Within minutes, the information was being transmitted to military commanders in every major nation. The message was simple: humanity was about to face its greatest test, and failure meant extinction. In the depths of Antarctica, beneath miles of ice, the most secret of humanity's preparations was coming to life. The Genesis Project had been humanity's ultimate insurance policy, a massive underground complex capable of supporting millions of people for centuries, equipped with manufacturing facilities that could rebuild human civilization from scratch. But Genesis wasn't just a shelter. Hidden within its depths were the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created, technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics to their breaking point. Quantum disruptors, gravity weapons, and experimental energy systems that could theoretically crack moons. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the project's director, stood in the primary command center watching status displays come online after years of dormancy. Around her, thousands of the world's brightest scientists and military specialists were emerging from cryogenic storage, ready to take their positions in humanity's last stand. "Status report," Harper commanded. "All primary systems are online," reported her chief engineer. "The quantum arsenal is charging and will be ready for deployment within 6 hours. The gravity manipulation systems are functional, and our energy generation capacity is at 100%. Harper nodded. Genesis represented the culmination of every black project, every secret research initiative, every theoretical breakthrough that humanity had achieved in the past century. If the surface world fell to the alien invasion, Genesis would continue the fight. As the hidden preparations continued across Earth, the approaching alien fleet maintained its steady course toward the inner solar system. Admiral Kefvar stood on his command bridge, reviewing the intelligence reports from his long-range scouts. "Admiral," reported his aide, "our sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures from various points on the planet's surface and in orbit around their star." Kefvar frowned. The initial reconnaissance had suggested that human technology was primitive by galactic standards. But these new readings implied capabilities that hadn't been present during their earlier surveys. "Specify the nature of these energy signatures." "Sir, we're reading massive power generation facilities, including some that appear to be fusion-based. More concerning, we're detecting what appear to be weapons platforms in orbit around their planet, and possibly larger installations on their natural satellite." The Admiral's four eyes blinked in sequence. This was unexpected. The reconnaissance data had shown humans were barely capable of maintaining a few small space stations. Now they appeared to have significant orbital infrastructure. Could they have developed these capabilities since our last survey? "Sir, the installations appear to be well established. Some of the energy signatures suggest they've been operational for years, possibly decades." Kefvar felt a chill run through his chitinous frame. Had humanity been deliberately hiding their capabilities? Were they more advanced than the Confederation had realized? Admiral, another aide reported, long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer regions of their system. Multiple large objects are changing course to intercept our fleet. Display tactical overview. The holographic display updated to show the human solar system with the approaching Confederation fleet and several dozen objects moving to intercept them. The human objects were much smaller than the alien ships, but they were moving fast and appeared to be armed. Sir, preliminary analysis suggests these are kinetic projectiles, possibly launched from their outer planet's orbital facilities. Impact velocity will be significant. Admiral Kefvar stared at the display in growing disbelief. Not only had humans hidden their true technological capabilities, but they were actively engaging a superior force rather than attempting communication or surrender. It was exactly the kind of response the Council had predicted, but seeing it in action was still shocking. All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Activate defensive systems and ready the primary weapons arrays. As the Confederation fleet began preparing for combat, Dr. Chen was watching the same data from her station at Cheyenne Mountain. The human kinetic projectiles were still hours away from their targets, but early indications suggested they would impact with tremendous force. General Morrison, she called out, the Prometheus array has achieved first launch. 12 asteroid-class projectiles are on intercept courses with the alien fleet. Morrison joined her at the console. Estimated impact force? Sir, each projectile is moving at approximately 10% light speed. If they penetrate the aliens' defenses, each impact will be equivalent to several hundred nuclear weapons. The general smiled grimly. And, if they don't? Then, we've revealed our hand and they'll know what we're capable of. Sir, I'm also receiving reports that our orbital platforms have achieved target lock. We're ready for coordinated strikes the moment they enter effective range. As both fleets prepared for humanity's first interstellar battle, neither side fully understood what they were about to face. The Confederation expected to overwhelm a primitive species with superior technology. Humanity prepared to fight for survival against impossible odds. But, in the hidden facilities and secret installations across Earth, weapons were charging that would shock the galaxy. Humanity had been preparing for this war for generations, developing technologies and strategies specifically designed to defeat a superior enemy. The moment when humanity would choose war was fast approaching, and, when it came, the galaxy would discover that humans had not been idle during their centuries of apparent primitiveness. They had been preparing, planning, and building the tools they would need to fight gods. The battle that was about to begin would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of galactic civilization itself. Admiral Kefvar watched in growing horror as his flagship's shield generators screamed warnings across every console on the bridge. The first wave of human kinetic projectiles had arrived, and they were nothing like what his combat experience had prepared him for. Shield strength down to 60% from a single impact, his chief engineer reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. Admiral, these projectiles are moving at significant fractions of light speed. Our shields weren't designed to handle kinetic impacts of this magnitude. Through the observation ports, Kefvar could see the brilliant flashes of light as other ships in his fleet took direct hits. 3 vessels had already gone dark, their shields completely overwhelmed by the tremendous kinetic energy of the human weapons. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence indicated primitive technology. His aide was frantically reviewing the tactical displays. Sir, it appears humans have been developing kinetic weapons specifically designed to counter energy-based defenses. The projectiles are dense metal cores wrapped in ablative materials that help them penetrate our shield matrices. Another impact sent shockwaves through the flagship's hull. Warning lights flashed as secondary systems began failing under the strain. Kefvar had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy, but he had never experienced anything like this. Most civilized species favored energy weapons and defensive screens. Humans were literally throwing rocks at them, rocks moving fast enough to shatter planets. Sir, called out the communications officer. We're receiving a transmission from the human planet. Display it. The hologram shimmered and resolved into the image of an elderly human male wearing what appeared to be a military uniform. His expression was calm, almost casual, despite the battle raging around his planet. "Greetings," the human said in accented galactic standard. "I am General Morrison of the North American Defense Command. I'm calling to offer you terms for surrender." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in amazement. This primitive species was offering him surrender terms while his vastly superior fleet was under attack. The audacity was breathtaking. "Human," Kethvar replied, "you are facing the combined might of the Galactic Confederation. Surrender now and your species will be granted protectorate status under our governance." Morrison smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. "Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You're the one who should be surrendering. You've brought 300 ships to fight an entire planet. We consider those to be unfavorable odds for you." Before Kethvar could respond, another wave of impacts struck his fleet. This time, the projectiles were different, smaller but faster, and they seemed to be targeting specific systems rather than attempting to overwhelm shields through brute force. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "these new projectiles are precision strikes. They're targeting our weapon systems, engine assemblies, and communication arrays. Our combat effectiveness is being systematically degraded." Kethvar studied the tactical display in growing disbelief. The humans weren't just defending themselves, they were conducting a sophisticated military operation designed to disable his fleet rather than destroy it outright. The implications were staggering. "Admiral," Morrison continued from the communication link, "let me explain your situation. You're currently facing the combined defense systems of a species that has spent the last 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare. We've been monitoring your civilization for decades, studying your technology, and developing specific countermeasures for exactly this scenario." "Impossible," Kethvar breathed. "Our surveillance showed no evidence of advanced military capabilities." Morrison's smile widened. "That's because we wanted you to see what we wanted you to see. Did you really think a species capable of splitting atoms would be unable to hide installations from orbital reconnaissance?" As if to emphasize his point, new energy signatures began appearing across human space. Massive installations that had been invisible to Confederation sensors suddenly revealed themselves, their weapons arrays charging with power levels that made Kethvar's instruments screen warnings. "Sir," his aide whispered, "those installations, some of them are larger than our battleships." "How did they hide them?" "We didn't hide them," Morrison's voice cut across the bridge's communications. "We built them inside asteroids, on the dark sides of moons, in the depths of gas giant atmospheres. We've been preparing for this day since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back. The orbital platforms around Earth opened fire, sending streams of coherent energy that made the Confederation's own weapons look like flashlights. But these weren't random attacks, each beam was precisely targeted to disable rather than destroy, systematically stripping away the alien fleet's ability to fight back." "This is impossible," Kethvar muttered, watching his mighty fleet being methodically dismantled by what should have been a primitive species. "No single planet should have this level of military infrastructure." "Admiral," Morrison said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "you've made a fundamental error in understanding humanity. You see, we're not just one planet. We're one species, united by a simple principle: nobody threatens Earth without consequences." As Morrison spoke, new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Ships were emerging from concealment throughout the solar system, not primitive spacecraft, but vessels that rivaled Confederation technology in size and apparent capability. "Sir," the tactical officer reported in a shaking voice, "I'm reading over 800 human vessels converging on our position. Some of them they're larger than our dreadnoughts." Kethvar stared at the display in shock. The humans hadn't just been hiding weapons, they had been hiding an entire fleet. A fleet that appeared to be specifically designed for fighting opponents with superior technology. "How?" he asked Morrison directly. "Simple," the general replied. "We've been building and preparing for over a century. Every resource we could spare, every technological breakthrough, every strategic innovation, all focused on a single goal: being ready for the day when someone came to our world with hostile intentions. Another human vessel decloaked nearby, this one so close to Kefvar's flagship that collision warnings began sounding. The ship was massive, its hull studded with weapon systems that defied easy classification. But, what truly shocked the Admiral was the name painted on its side in bold letters, Terra Invicta. Unconquered Earth, Morrison translated helpfully. That's our flagship, Admiral. Built specifically for this conversation. The Terra Invicta's weapons came online, but, instead of firing, the ship simply held position. The message was clear: humanity had the Confederation fleet completely at their mercy but was choosing to demonstrate restraint. Admiral Kefvar, Morrison continued, here's what's going to happen. Your fleet will power down all weapon systems and prepare to be escorted to Earth orbit, where we can discuss the terms of your surrender. Your crews will be treated according to the laws of war, and, after negotiations are complete, you'll be free to return to your territory with a message for your government. And what message would that be? Kefvar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That humanity chooses to respond to invasion with overwhelming force, but we prefer to end conflicts through negotiation rather than annihilation. Consider this a demonstration of both our military capabilities and our commitment to avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Kefvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Fear, confusion, and grudging respect were written across their alien features. His fleet, the pride of the Confederation military, had been outmaneuvered and outgunned by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Sir, his aide whispered, our weapons are completely offline. Their precision strikes have disabled every offensive system in the fleet without destroying a single ship. The level of accuracy required is beyond anything we've ever encountered, Kefvar finished. He looked back at Morrison's image on the communication screen. General, how long have you been planning this defense? Since the day we invented the radio and started listening for signals from space, Morrison replied. We've always known that contact with alien civilizations was inevitable. We just decided early on that when that contact came, we wanted to be ready for any possibility, including the possibility that you might not come in peace. The implications of Morrison's words hit Kefvar like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't developed their military capabilities in response to the Confederation's surveillance. They had been preparing for galactic contact since before the Confederation even knew they existed. Admiral, Morrison said, his tone becoming more formal, I need your decision. Surrender and enter negotiations, or we can continue this demonstration of human military capability. I should warn you, though, what you've seen so far represents perhaps 10% of our actual defensive capacity. Kefvar's four eyes blinked rapidly as he processed this information. If what Morrison was saying was true, then humanity possessed military capabilities that could threaten the entire galactic confederation. They weren't a primitive species to be subjugated, they were a potential superpower that had been hiding in plain sight. What are your terms? Kefvar asked finally. Complete withdrawal of all Confederation forces from human space, establishment of formal diplomatic relations, and mutual non-aggression treaties. In exchange, we're willing to share certain technologies and establish trade relationships that would benefit both our civilizations. And if we refuse? Morrison's friendly expression didn't change, but something in his eyes became cold and hard. Then, you'll discover what happens when humanity chooses war over diplomacy. Admiral, your civilization has ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. We've been preparing to fight you for 100 years. Who do you think has been more focused on military development? The question hung in the air as Kefvar contemplated the impossible situation he found himself in. His mission had been to subjugate or eliminate a primitive species. Instead, he had discovered that humanity was potentially the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. Sir, his communications officer reported quietly, we're receiving similar ultimatums from human forces throughout the system. Admiral, they have us completely surrounded and outgunned. Kefvar closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his long career. All ships, stand down. Prepare for prisoner escort protocols. Admiral, Morrison said, his friendly tone returning, I want you to understand something important. This doesn't have to be the beginning of a new war. This can be the beginning of a new peace, but one based on mutual respect rather than domination. As the Confederation fleet powered down their weapons and prepared for escort to Earth orbit, Admiral Kethvar realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed in the past few hours. Humanity wasn't just another member species to be integrated into galactic civilization. They were a force that would reshape civilization itself. General Morrison, Kethvar said finally, I believe my government will be very interested in your proposals for diplomatic relations. Excellent, Morrison replied. Welcome to Earth, Admiral. I think this is going to be the beginning of a very interesting conversation. As the human fleet formed up around the surrendered Confederation vessels, Kethvar couldn't help but think that he had just witnessed a moment that would be remembered for millennia. The moment when humanity announced their presence to the galaxy not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as equals demanding respect. The moment when humanity chose war, and won it before the first battle was even finished.